Nature's Phoenix, second edition, is now available to purchase. It's packed with valuable insights on fire ecology, including the topics we'll be covering in this episode. If you're interested in learning more, you can find a link to purchase the book in the description below.
Welcome back to the webinar series, Chronicles from Nature's Phoenix, where co-authors Dr. Dominick DellaSala of Wild Heritage and Dr. Chad Hanson of the John Muir Project share the screen with other renowned wildfire experts. This episode, featuring expert panelists Maya Kozla, Dr. Monica Bond, and Dr. Richard Hutto, immerses viewers into the ecological insights gained from studying bird and mammal responses to severe fire in conifer forests, covered in chapters 3 and 4 of Nature's Phoenix second edition.
Welcome, everyone. This webinar is being recorded, and I welcome you to the second in the Nature's Phoenix wildfire webinar series. And the topic of today's webinar is birds and mammals in severe fire environments. I think it's a very exciting topic and really gets at an important need here. I think in general, the sort of media coverage we get about severe fires often depicts these areas after the fire as being lifeless moonscapes. And it's one of those places where I see such a sharp divergence between the sort of media and public perception of post-fire forests and the science that's showing that post-fire forests, including and perhaps especially the most intensely burned areas, are vibrant areas full of wildlife. And we're going to hear more specifics about that in regards to birds and mammals and their use of this area. This ties in the book, Mixed Severity Fires, Nature's Phoenix, the second edition of which just came out. This ties in with chapters 3 and 4 in that book, as well as parts of chapter 2. So we have three amazing speakers today, and I'm going to introduce the first one in a second. As with our previous webinar, we're going to save questions until all three speakers have presented, but please feel free to go ahead and start posting your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll use that as the basis for that Q&A section when that comes up. So our first speaker is Richard Hutto. Richard Hutto is Professor Emeritus in Biological Sciences and Wildlife Biology at the University of Montana. After joining the faculty in 1977, he taught courses in ecology, fire ecology, and ornithology across a nearly 40-year career. He conducted research on migratory land birds throughout the West. In 1990, he developed the Forest Service's Northern Region Land Bird Monitoring Program to generate data so that we might better understand the ecological effects of various land use practices. Hutto also established the Avian Science Center on the University of Montana campus. Following the Yellowstone fires of 1988, his research focus shifted toward the ecology of birds in burned forests, an interest he maintains to this day. Dr. Hutto also hosted a nationally televised PBS series called Birdwatch, which ran from 1998 to 2001. With that, let me turn it over to Dr. Hutto.
Thanks, Doug. Let me see if I can get things shared here.
Looking good.
Okay, people see that?
Yep.
Doug, thanks for the intro. Basically, what you said, that's what I'm talking about, about the benefits of severe fire. Most of the material, or some of the material anyway, comes from the chapter that I wrote with Monica and Dominick in the newly republished book. And it's not about birds and bird conservation. It's about how we use birds as a tool to understand the importance of severe fire in our mixed conifer forests in Western United States. And what's amazing is I'm going to tell you a few facts that come out of studies of birds. When Western conifer forests burn, they usually become transformed into magical places. This is a fact. And you can see this photo right here. There's obviously been a transformation of this forest that burned severely. But it's not until you get in there close that you begin to see things that just blow your mind. Go in close and you see that severely burned forests are biologically unique because so many species seem to appear out of nowhere. You can't see them except in cases where the forests burn severely. And it's not just plants like this slide shows, but there's birds in particular that are amazingly interesting. This is the champion. This is the star of the show. This is the black-backed woodpecker. I first noticed an association between this bird and burned forest when I moved to Missoula. There was a fire just out of town in the Paddy Canyon, burned severely, a couple thousand acres, something like that. In the first year I was there, I went up in the winter and saw this silly bird. And I had bird watched for quite a while, a number of years before I got the job here in University of Montana. But I was kind of blown away with a number of these sitting in that burned forest. I'd never seen one before. Then some years later, after the fires of '88 in Yellowstone, I got money from National Geographic and other organizations to begin looking more systematically at this issue of whether this black-backed woodpecker might actually be somehow specially associated with burned forests. So I went into, must have been 40 or 50 different fires after 1988 there. And then simultaneously, we had begun the land bird monitoring program out of the Forest Service here in the northern region so that we could survey birds in every conceivable vegetation type in the Northern Rockies. And what we found was this bird is relatively restricted to burned forest conditions. This bird screams fire. Here are some example of the kind of data you can get it to just do point counts and say, gee, what's the probability of occurrence in these different vegetation types? And you can see the sample sizes in the hundreds, if not thousands, in different vegetation types. And if it's burned, it's probably 20 to 40 times more abundant than anywhere else. In most of the other places where we saw them, there were burns nearby. So for all intents and purposes, the bird is really restricted to burned forest. And I always say, geez, I'll give you $10,000 if you can show me one outside of a burned forest. If you give me $10,000 for when I show you in a burned forest, and I'll walk away a rich man. So this bird screams fire. And as I said, it's more restricted than any other bird probably in the world to burned forest conditions. So why is that important? Well, it's important because, my gosh, it's indicating that this is probably an important system to be thinking about. And it's not just birds. So the more time you spend in burned forests, look at this. Go ahead and show me a fire morel anywhere but in a severely burned mixed conifer forest. You can't. Show me a jewel beetle anywhere but outside a severely burned mixed conifer forest in Western United States. You can't. Show me a wildflower show like this in a mixed conifer forest outside of a severe burn. You can't. So the idea here is these mixed forests are transformed. They're not destroyed. And this is what Doug was saying. They're transformed by severe fire. There are special conditions that make them, to me, much more special than old growth forests. They should be revered in the same way we revere old growth forests. That's what the birds are telling us. Here's another fact. This kind of magical transformation is not common to all mixed conifer forests. So you're not going to see this sort of show in an open, grown, dry ponderosa pine forest around Flagstaff. Sorry, you don't get the show. It takes a mid to low elevation to mid elevation mixed conifer forest to get this magic to happen. Not only that, but it takes dense mixed conifer forests, uncut mixed conifer forests with tree densities that are in the hundreds, not 6 to 10 snags per acre like snag management guidelines tell you. We're talking hundreds of trees per acre. Look at these trees here, the Douglas fir with the woodpecker digging. They're going after beetles that come in to get the trees that are defenseless now. And so the beetles populations go through the roof. And the other thing that's interesting is the things that are most restricted to these severely burned forests tend to occur in the more severely burned portions of those forests. So look at the black-backed woodpecker data here. You can go into unburned forest far from fire, and there's hardly any. Unburned near fire, a little more. Low, medium, and high severity, they go through the roof. Go to morel mushroom, and here's some data from outside Yosemite that Andrew Larson and others just published. The more severe the plot, the more completely burned, the more likely you're going to get morel mushroom response. Let me give you one more data slide, and then we'll be done with bird data. This is a plot of 50 different bird species. Every little square is a bird species. And what I'm plotted here is fire severity. Here's fire severity, low, medium, high, percent tree loss. And then on the x-axis, we've got, whoops, I'm sorry. Where to go here? There. And on the x-axis, we've got time since fire. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years. And so in the box, if a bird is significantly more abundant in the burn forest than outside a burn forest, it shows red. This is a log odds ratio data. And the asterisk means it's statistically significant. So the upper left box there's house wren, HOWR, and house wren loves it hot. It loves burned forest, especially as you get later in time. Western bluebird, blackback woodpecker, western woodpecker, mountain bluebird, Lewis's woodpecker. You got to wait 8-10 years to get Lewis's woodpecker to be significantly more abundant in burn forest than outside burn forest. And so what's amazing, yeah, some birds down here in the blue means they're significantly less likely to occur in burn than unburned forest. Sure, some birds hate fire. So what? What's important here is that there's a lot of birds, and most of these in the upper left are ones that are relatively restricted to burn forest, just like the blackback woodpecker. So you can get white-breasted nuthatch, Williamson sapsucker. Williamson sapsucker 10 years after starts going through the roof. And so here's the story. The species most restricted to burn forests, those that have graphs that look like the graph I showed you with the blackback woodpecker, they like high severity, no matter how long it's been since fire, at least up to 10 years here. So all these stages of succession after fire are very special depending on the species. And the ones most restricted like it hot. Here's another neat fact that comes out of birds. There are anatomical characteristics or traits that have evolved in not just birds, in other species that are relatively restricted to burn forest conditions, because that's all they've lived with, right, in their evolutionary history. Look at this blackback woodpecker on the tree on the left. Its coloration and the matching of its background is no less impressive than that white-tailed ptarmigan on the right against snow. And it reflects a long evolutionary history of this bird with that particular environment. You don't get that in a year or two, you get it in thousands of years. So this bird, once again, this bird screams fire. And it's not just the blackback. You can look at thick bark on ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, western larch. You can look at serotiny in the cones, the cone positions, the tippy tops of trees. You can look at seeds that can sit in the soil for 150 years, waiting for extreme heat to germinate. You can look at beetles that have infrared sensors on their thorax and can detect heat for up to 50 miles away and colonize these burn forests. The adaptations of organisms to severe fire are phenomenal. This is a very special condition that our mixed conifer forests give us. And it's deep history there that we're talking about, evolutionary history, okay? It's not just tree ring history that goes back 100 years or two. We're going back thousands of years telling what's natural. What kind of fire regime is natural? So severely burned forest conditions are in no way unnatural, as implied by messages emerging from land management agencies and even conservation organizations. What you see often is things like this: high severity crown fires, unnatural. And low severity understory prescribed fire, that's very natural. Well, come on. That's not what the birds are telling us. Not only that, get a load of the literature that is being distributed by organizations like the Forest Service, see at the bottom, Nature Conservancy. This is a conservation organization telling us there's good fire on the left there. Here's the good fire, and here's bad fire. Good fire, bad fire. Now, what would a bird be telling you? Good fire, bad fire. Just the opposite. So, here we go again. There we go. So here's the last fact then comes out of bird ecology. High severity crown fires are not bad. They're natural and necessary component of our disturbance dependent mixed conifer forests. So this is a natural process, absolutely necessary. We have to begin to educate the public to that fact. Incidentally, the National Forest Management Act and other laws tell us that we have to be managing our public lands to maintain the ecological integrity of the system that sustains us. And so you have to be looking at a scene like this. Here's a severely burned forest and asking yourself, are we doing things in management to sustain this system, this severely burned forest condition? This is not a fire scar, and this fire outside of Missoula, Montana, it's a beauty mark. And so I think there's 3 areas that we have to be thinking about management a little more carefully. Before a fire burns, during the fire, firefighting itself, and after fire. So here is what birds seem to be telling us. Think about maintaining ecological integrity of conifer forests. And this is going to take modifications in activity before, during, and after fire. As I said, what about before fire? Well, obviously it's timber harvesting. There's no reason we can't harvest some timber. There's no problem with that. But we cannot be accepting justifications for harvesting and thinning forests in our mixed conifer forests. This is a dry, open ponderosa pine justification. In mixed conifer forests, they were never open grown like this. It's not a justification to say we need to thin these forests out. Because if anything, we're trying to minimize or mitigate severe fire when in fact they evolved with and need severe fire. You might, let's see, I'm trying to think of other justifications. Prescribed burning is very similar. It might be justified in some cases in the most open, low elevations, extreme southwestern US, but in mixed conifer forests, oh, come on, that's not anywhere near natural. And then you might say, well, wait, we have to cut a lot of trees and thin things out because of safety issues. Well, the research coming out of the fire lab here in Missoula, Montana shows safety has nothing to do with forest conditions out there. Attention to details in and around homes is a way to make structures safe, not forest thinning and prescribed fires. Sorry. This is an amazing video, if you haven't seen it, by Jack Cohn out of the fire lab in Missoula. He shows 250-foot walls of flame 40 feet from a house. The house emerges unfazed. So safety is not a reason either to go in and start harvesting trees in these mixed conifer forests. But harvesting in an ecologically sustainable fashion is fine. Okay, let's talk about firefighting itself. Why in the world are we risking lives going into the middle of nowhere trying to save the forest from itself? There's, again, very little risk to homes miles and miles away from communities. And so we have to rethink, whether we really need to be fighting fire the same way we are. Now, don't get me wrong. There's more of this and larger fires because climate change. But climate change is a separate issue. If you want to fix the problem that we're having with greater frequency of fires and more extent, the larger fires, then you have to do something about climate change. You don't solve that by fighting fires in the outback. And thirdly, after fire, salvage logging. This is the single most damaging management activity, in my view, on the land. Not one single species that is relatively restricted to burn forest conditions benefits from from salvage logging. Not one. And there have been dozens upon dozens of studies now, and they're in 100% agreement. Because of their unmatched ecological value, burned forests should be the last places, not the first place we go to cut timber. This is just like old growth forests. Why don't we go in there? Because we value it. That's not true for burned forests. We even invent the word salvage to imply there's no value, except if we just rip the wood out. We have to get out of this mentality. And then you might say, oh, wait. We have to help the local communities. this is an economic, they just lost some of the timber base. You need to help them economically. My response to that is, there's a lot of ways we could help the local communities economically besides salvage logging. For example, how about wildflower viewing and bird watching? This could be the most amazing nature-based tourist opportunity local communities will ever have for a number of years. So there's a lot of things we could be thinking about with before, during, and after fire management that could change to the benefit of species that require disturbance-based mixed conifer forest conditions. So that's basically the story as I see it. The birds are telling us we really need to think more about management of our mixed conifer forests and not apply strategies that are best applied to open-grown ponderosa pine in the extreme Southwest, for example. These are very special conditions, and we need to be thinking about what we have to do to maintain these conditions. And this, again, is not me talking, it's the birds talking. And I've tried to write all this up in a book, so if anyone knows a publisher, I'm ready to send this thing out and try to get the story out to fight the Smokey Bear sort of mentality that all fires are bad and we have to do everything in our power to prevent them. No, we have to do everything in our power to learn to live with natural severe fire processes. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dick. That was really great to hear. And just to remind everyone, we're going to do Q&A at the end after all three presenters are done. But feel free to start posting your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom at this point. So turning to our next speaker, Monica Bond. Monica Bond is a wildlife biologist and co-founder of the Wild Nature Institute, as well as a postdoctoral research associate at the Department of Evolutionary Biology and Environmental Studies at the University of Zurich. Her research is focused on population ecology, habitat selection, and social behavior of wildlife. Monica has conducted field research on gray-tailed voles, western burrowing owls, spotted owls, blackback woodpeckers, arboreal salamanders, northern elephant seals, Hawaiian monk seals, eastern white-bearded wildebeests, and Maasai giraffes. She has published more than 50 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles and book chapters, and is co-editor of the book Tarangire, Human-Wildlife Coexistence in a Fragmented Ecosystem. And most germane to today's talk, Monica has published more studies on the relationship between spotted owls and fire than any other scientist. Let me turn it over to Monica now.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dick, that was a wonderful presentation and a perfect segue into what I will be talking about. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the science of mammals and high severity fire. That's the subject of my chapter in the Nature's Phoenix book. And Dick, I don't think you're going to be too surprised that, it's the story of birds, but mammals are also telling the same story as the birds and the mushrooms and the wild flowers and everything else that thrives in high severity fire. So first, a little aside about mammals and how fascinating and diverse they are. They fly, they swim, climb trees, dig underground, crawl and walk and run. And mammals also play really important roles in all of the ecosystems where they're found, performing a lot of critical functions. And these functions include predation, herbivory, and granivory, which means they affect the amounts and types of food that they eat. And of course, mammals themselves are both predator and prey. Mammals like bats are important pollinators of many flowering plants, and mammals of all sizes, from the tiniest mouse to the biggest elephant, are important dispersers of seeds, and therefore they influence the spread and regrowth of vegetation. Mammals cycle nutrients, including through their poop, their urine, even their dead bodies. It fertilizes the soil and helps new plants to grow. And some are ecosystem engineers, meaning just a single species of mammal can significantly change a vast area. For example, think of the beaver massively altering river systems, creating new pools and wetlands for fish and riparian birds. And so it stands to reason, of course, that any decline in the abundance of mammals caused by humans when we interfere with the natural processes of fire and burned habitat is going to have negative effects on these critical ecosystem functions. How fire affects mammals depends a lot also what Dick was talking about with the birds, the severity of the fire, time since fire occurred, how much of a given area has burned severely, how much of the habitat before the fire was isolated or fragmented by urbanization or roads or logging and other unnatural disturbances, and then the post-fire invasion of non-native species. So in the book chapter, which is chapter 4, I provide an overview of published studies about mammal responses to mixed and high severity fires, and I actually expand beyond conifer forests to ecosystems around the world. I describe research on the 4 major taxonomic groups of terrestrial mammals, which are bats, small mammals, ungulates, which are mammals with hooves, and carnivores. And in the chapter, I didn't really include studies that simulated or modeled fires. I only included empirical studies of how mammals responded to severe wildfires that actually occurred. And I excluded studies that didn't account for fire severity or for post-fire logging, because it's very important to understand the effects of severe fire in particular and without post-fire human interference. And I focused on the indirect population level responses to fire, as this is what's going to be affecting mammals that occupy an area and their abilities to perform those critical ecosystem functions I mentioned earlier. So I collated and presented results from studies comparing habitat use and populations of mammals in severely burned areas versus unburned or low burned, and without the confounding effect of post-fire human intervention. The basic story of fire, though, is one that's repeated in fire-adapted ecosystems all across the world. And this is a story of high-intensity fire in shrublands and forests and grasslands, exposing seeds and creating a pulse of new plant growth and generating a superabundance of insects. This brings in bats that feed on the insects and a burst in small mammal populations like mice and gophers that eat the seeds and the herbs, and then ungulates like deer and elk that feed on the fresh, new, especially nutritious grasses and shrubs that flourish in post-fire areas. And of course, this increase in prey brings in carnivores like foxes and martens and mountain lions, which hunt in the severely burned areas. And as Dick mentioned with the birds, there are some species that temporarily decrease right after fire because they prefer to live in areas with more dense cover. But as the vegetation regrows, those species recover in time. And overall, though, there are many more species that thrive in the most severely burned landscapes immediately and for several years after fire. And of course, as long as we humans do not tamper or interfere with the natural successional processes. And so just briefly for the rest of the talk, I'm going to mention each of these groups of mammals and talk about how they respond to fire, so you can leave this webinar with a good sense of how each of these taxonomic groups responds to severe fire. So let's start with the bats. Bats are underestimated and often even maligned by people, but they are amazing and important. They consume vast quantities of insects, and they transfer nutrients, most notably nitrogen, through their feces from foraging to roosting areas, and they're major predators of adult mosquitoes and help control mosquito populations, which is a good thing for us. Studies have shown significantly greater bat activity in severely burned forests than in nearby unburned areas. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First, most bats eat insects, and this increase in bat foraging activity is associated with documented huge increases in insects in severely burned forests. And compared to low severity and unburned areas, severely burned forests have many times more aquatic insects, adult emerging aquatic insects, moths, flies, and beetles. And in fact, in one study in boreal forests in Canada, more than half of the 86 types of beetles that were identified in the study were found nowhere else but the freshly burned stands, and especially the oldest forest that had just burned severely. And this is backed up by other studies where many insect families are found only in burned forests. The second reason that bats like burned forests is that they rely on basal hollows for roosting, and basal hollows are cavities in trees that are made by repeated fire scarring and healing. And this photo here is a roost site for Townsend's big-eared bats in a burned coast redwood tree in Northern California. So sometimes fire might burn some of these trees, but it creates a lot more of these trees that are important roost sites for these bats. Okay, next up, small mammals. Small mammals are critically important in their ecosystems. They disperse seeds and mycorrhizal fungi. They aerate the soils by digging tunnels underground. And in this way, they profoundly influence vegetation structure and composition. And they're also very important prey for many carnivores. In studies of small mammals after fire, we find that, like with other taxa, time since fire is pretty important for them. And you'll see the small mammal community change over time as post-fire succession in vegetation occurs and different resources become available to species that like different types of food and habitats. Severe fire increases the abundance of available seed and new plant growth for lots of different kinds of small mammals. So this is kind of a big slide here, but I tried to kind of put all of it together in one. These are small mammal responses, population responses in 3 habitat types. So we have chaparral and sage scrub here, forest and woodlands, and deserts and grasslands. And you can see there's a lot more species that have positive or neutral responses to severe fire. And that's depicted here by these blue arrows pointing upwards. These are all species that increased after, like immediately after severe fire, or remained same numbers before and after. And I'll also note that for the species that declined, which are these ones here with this downward facing orange arrow, it was always temporary. And all of them began to increase again in number within a few years after the fire. And I want to highlight the deer mouse. It's kind of like the black-backed woodpecker of the mammals. All throughout the Western US, deer mice are almost always the most numerous of the small mammal species in severely burned forests right after fire. And their numbers are actually much higher inside the severe burn than outside the burn. And mice in severely burned forests are source populations that spread mice into the surrounding unburned landscapes. So in other words, they didn't come from outside the burn and repopulate. They actually started in the burn, and then they're repopulating the surrounding unburned landscape because their numbers are so high. Post-fire plant regeneration provides highly nutritious forage for ungulates, which are, again, those hoofed mammals. And the plants within the burns produce more protein that's easier to digest than the same plants in unburned areas. And this attracts ungulates to burned areas. And study after study shows that moose, elk, mule deer, and bighorn sheep are all attracted to and prefer to be in severely burned shrublands and forests compared to adjacent unburned areas. So with these ungulates, it's quite clear severe fire improves habitat condition for them. And on the other hand, caribou eat ground lichens in the winter, which take a while to recover after the fire. So caribou, they didn't have any the fire didn't have negative effects on fecundity or survival, but they did avoid using severely burned areas compared to unburned. And I want to highlight another species that responds really positively to high severity fire, which is the mule deer. Mule deer density in severely burned shrublands can be more than twice as high as an adjacent old unburned chaparral. And in several studies, there were severe fire areas in shrublands where the density increased by 400%. And female deer produce more babies, and they are in better physical condition going into the winter in burned areas because the food is better there. Okay, so now we have these severely burned areas with lots of small mammals and ungulates. It's no surprise that this brings in our carnivores. All of these carnivore species were found using severely burned forests, and some were documented even more often in the burns than in unburned areas, especially foxes. And importantly, these studies also showed that the forests these species used were not logged after the fire. So the structure of the dead trees and fallen logs was maintained, and this is obviously important for these carnivores. So post-fire logging reduced habitat suitability for them. Carnivores often supplement their diets with fruits, and there was a really cool study in Spain I want to mention that showed that red foxes, stone martens, and badgers were important dispersers of seeds deep into the severely burned areas, more than 1 kilometer from the parent plant. And plus, the seed that was collected from the scat that had passed through the guts of these carnivores germinated at much higher rates than seeds that did not pass through their guts. So like other species like small mammals and ungulates, carnivores also help with vegetation regrowth after fire. So our take-home messages are, For mammals, there are winners and losers from severe fire, as with all types of organisms. But overall, there are many more winners from severe fire and many more losers from post-fire interference, such as salvage logging, herbicides, and rodenticides. Severe fire is natural and necessary, and post-fire interference is destructive to mammals. We live on a fiery planet. Fire burns, creates, and sustains habitats in a way it's done for countless thousands of years. And so organisms, including the birds Dick talked about and mammals I've talked about, have evolved with this disturbance for all that time. Mammals and other wildlife using severely burned habitats provide a lot of critical ecosystem services that benefit people too. And I'm going to end by paraphrasing Nobel Prize winner Wangari Maathai here, when she said, "We did not create this earth. We don't know how it works, so we shouldn't be messing with it." The best thing we can do for mammals and other native organisms is to stop destroying natural habitats with our interference, protect what's left, restore as much of what we've destroyed as possible, and then leave it alone to burn or not burn as it will. And of course, let's continue to study mammals and wildfire because it's always fascinating. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monica. It was a wonderful presentation. And as a reminder, please post your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll be getting to that right after Maya's presentation. So let me transition over there to introduce Maya Kozla. Maya is a biologist with training as a toxicologist. She's also a filmmaker, documenting forest biodiversity and the impacts of extraction. And she is a writer known for her award-winning poetry. Maya recently co-authored 2 peer-reviewed research studies of sequoia forest regeneration after intense fires. She directed a documentary about blackback woodpeckers called Searching for the Gold Spot, The Wild After Wildfire, that aired on PBS. She was selected as Sonoma County's Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020, where she helped Sonoma's communities heal after the recent wildfires there through gatherings, field walks, and shared writing. Her books include All the Fires of Wind and Light and Keelbone. Her recent awards include the 2023 Grassroots Activist of the Year Award from the Fund for Wild Nature, the 2020 Environmentalist of the Year Award from the Sonoma County Conservation Council, and the 2020 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award. Let me turn it over to Maya.
Well, thank you so much, Doug, and thank you, Monica and Dick, for brilliant presentations. Let me just look at the screen share here. I'm gonna, is this good working for everyone?
Let's give it another minute.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. There it is.
Here we go.
You got it?
Yep.
Excellent, thank you. So just following along the footsteps of the past two presentations, my search for mammals in post-fire forests followed a pretty detailed black-backed woodpecker study led by Chad Hanson and Tanya Chi. And we were out there looking for signs of blackbacks and found, of course, inevitably the richness of post-fire forests that you've been seeing and hearing about in the previous two presentations. This particular forest and all of the forests I'm going to share with you may show you some live trees in the distance, some live trees in the foreground, and inevitably there is a patch that has burned intensely where most of the trees turn into snags, highly productive spaces, what I call housing complexes for the wild. And in fact, you might look at this and think, of course, now you're probably rethinking how you look at snags, I'm hoping. And in this case, what you're looking at is a little snag patch very close to Atkinson Meadow in Stanislaus National Forest. And one of the middle snags there houses 3 great gray owls, 2 chicks, and the parent, the female parent is up there with them at this time. You can't see them. But this is, in these particular places, this is a historic nest. It's been there for years. I think they nested, in fact, they did nest this year, and I know they had at least one chick. So this is the type of beauty that and persistent habitat that you'll see. Of course, it's changing constantly, but that's the kind of place where I thought, well, why not go where we're finding glimpses of these animals and signs with scat and footprints, pug marks, etc. Why not go figure out how many mammals are using this? Let's see if I can, oops. Let's see if I can change this slide. There we go. Indian paintbrush in the foreground here. Wherever you go in the post-fire forests of the American West and British Columbia, I'm seeing a lot of recently started looking at mammals, trying to document mammals with remote cameras in British Columbia as well as California. And you see these post-fire patches that burn with different intensities. And in the middle of the most intensely burned patch, you see this life, this incredible rich life coming up that you've been hearing about. Small mammals use these rich patches and plants that they can feed on. And of course, they will inevitably attract the larger mammals. And I was looking for both the small mammals as well as the larger mammals. And here in Sequoia National Forest is post-fire conifer regeneration. And this particular area was a study site that inspired me because it was a 2015 study by Chad Hanson, working with folks that were sampling the scat of fishers. Fishers are endangered small weasel, I guess smaller than a wolverine. It's actually the largest weasel, but the largest member of the weasel family is the wolverine in North America. And so fishers are just one step down from them, and they're known to use this habitat. And it's a post-fire habitat, and everywhere surrounding it was a snag forest. So this study got me really curious, and I started putting cameras out initially, not long enough, but later I would leave the cameras out, remote cameras out for months on video. So a lot of what you're seeing with slightly low resolution is still shots of video, and I'll show you a few videos as well. My interest was in documenting these habitats. Are these animals passing through, or are they using these spaces? Here you see a gray fox bringing in a chipmunk at night, and you see him or her climbing a fallen log. And this is something I've observed over and over again, which points to the value of the intact habitat, which we heard about in previous presentations, which is just leave it there, let it slowly do its job of supporting all the life that is there. And this is just not one or two observations, but literally hundreds of observations of animals that are using either standing snags or fallen logs, or both, really. And this marten, I put my camera here quite by chance. I left it there in December, and by January, what I believe is a female was visiting quite frequently, and by April digging into the notch of this V of the snag. And sure enough, she found a little den there and came in quite frequently. I'm pretty sure martens have multiple dens, and I didn't see her using it all the time, not every day, but quite frequently. And this was in May of this year. She brought what it looks like a gopher into this little den, and she just burrowed down into the den with her prize. So this is, here again, you're looking at an animal that's in an intensely burned patch, found a home, temporary or permanent, not known, and is actively using it, and it's supporting her activity, whether it's, using, because, sometimes they want, in fishers and other mammals, they want a little space to peacefully eat. So do we all. So anyway, that's something that I was lucky enough to observe this year. And this fisher here is, I'm not sure it's male or female. It looks like a young fisher that has taken an accipiter. If you look upside down, I know it's a little difficult to look upside down at the slide, but that is the head of a hawk. And it's an accipiter, probably either a young sharp-shinned hawk or a young Cooper's, not sure. And so she had a rest stop. This is very close to a creek. And yes, it does look very green. It's all willow and alder and other riparian corridor habitat. But in fact, it's in the middle. This creek is flowing through an intensely burned patch, another snag forest. It's in Sequoia National Monument, and it burned in the Castle Fire. So what we're seeing is that these animals are not passing through there. And let me see if this works or not. This young bear, for example, is doing what is probably picked up from its parent, is to dig into the rotting log for grubs, which is, again, pointing to the importance of leaving logs on the ground. And again, he's not walking on the ground and scraping at the log, he's walking on the log itself. Let's see. Sorry, let me just try and forward this. And so I'm also finding, there are moments of play, which to me are also just as interesting, because it shows the animals are spending time and relaxing in the space rather than just flying through it, which is what you see in literature and what you see in reports, is that they pass through these areas and they're not spending time. And here you can clearly see the coyotes quite relaxed. And this also reminds me about a study by Lewis and others that's, I think Monica alluded to, which shows that it was based in Arizona, shows that wolves and mountain lions, bears, elk, and mule deer use high severity burn patches quite actively, and they felt that habitat supported them. And again, it's probably the prey base that is available that Monica was talking about. And when I want to stay with play for just a minute, and also the idea that these here there's gray foxes, 2 of them, and again using the fallen snags, the logs, as a path for walking, for exploring, and of course it gives them that vantage point and an advantage over being on the ground. So same with the bobcat. So it seems to me that, again, this is another highly severe burn forest in a Stanislaus National Forest. And then this bobcat is clearly enjoying a little self-massage or rubbing against the roughness of a fallen log that burned during the rim fire. So I was actually mostly interested in fishers, and all these other mammals were just fascinating experiences. In particular, I'm not showing slides of that, but the flying squirrel, I've found a lot of flying squirrels using snag forest. So of course, in one case in Tahoe, a flying squirrel coming through and a marten following very closely. Just let me just get to this slide here. Oh yeah, there's a bobcat kitten using Lassen National Forest post-fire area after the Dixie Fire. And I found a lot of fisher using night shots of fisher passing through or using the same space. The ringtail is not very common, but I found a lot of ringtails using post-fire forests. This particular patch of forest is a low-intensity burn in the middle of intensely burned area of the rim fire, Stanislaus National Forest. So one of this same marten here, you can see the background is the severe burn. That's the same marten that caught the prey, and she's spent the night there and is sort of considering getting out of there for maybe a drink of water or something. This was one of the very few middle of the day shots that I got of marten using a post-fire forest, Sierra National Forest, where there are known very high occurrences of martens. This also is an area below this area. It's being quite heavily salvage logged right now. I like to call it savage logging because it's the area below this, down the hill, it's close to Huntington Lake. And of course, there's a lot of homes there. So for home safety purposes, I can see removing snags. But in fact, the upper areas, I'm hoping they stay intact as they are right now, because fishers and martens are both found there. And it's just really interesting that we have such a high number of mammals here. Let's see. And Lassen National Forest is another area which is quite astounding. This is an example of a fisher using, there's been several fishers using this part of an intensely burned part of Lassen National Forest. And I mean, this Richard Weir up in British Columbia has observed that fishers need large Doug firs, lodgepole pines, aspens, and cottonwoods, which have a slight rot or a cavity in them, and they actually dig into that, and it's either 6 feet off the ground or actually up to 40 feet high in the tree, in the snag, and their females make their dens in there. So these large snags with cavities as well as fallen logs are an incredibly important habitat where they can, sometimes they'll drag their prey items in there like you saw, or they just want to rest or raising their young. So let's see. In these cases, in all the cases that I've pointed out, every single one of those forests and is close to an area that is about to be removed. And sometimes people call it cleanup. And in some cases, they call it salvage logging. And it's quite an accepted approach right now, and of course mentioned by both the other speakers. This particular area, there's a young gray fox here. I don't know what happened there, but this entire area has been cleared out. You do see some of the snags, a vast majority of the large snags that would support ringtail, gray fox, fisher, marten are gone right now from that area. It's close to, I believe, the South Fork of Tuolumne River. And along with them, I think I saw about 90 different species of nesting birds over time. This was just several years of surveys, including black-backed woodpecker surveys, which led me to the mammal surveys. So these are some of the most valuable habitats. They're regrowing. So that it's not like there's no conifer regeneration happening. There's phenomenal conifer regeneration happening in all of these areas. They're logged, even after they're logged, sometimes they're quite forgiving, and not all of the growth, in fact, very sparse growth, but still you can see some of those surviving conifers still coming up after the logging. But in fact, it's that amount of destruction, I want to say, it doesn't favor these animals, because what will happen is they have to go search for new homes in that. Some people could say, well, gosh, they're going to go somewhere else and find new habitats. But somewhere else is where there are other animals already established there, the dominant animals, and everybody has their habitat. So finding a new habitat is not easy. It's sort of like having to find a new home all of a sudden. So in the case of this particular gray fox that I documented a couple of adult gray foxes, but I've not seen, it's sort of a still, very silent picture because this entire area has been logged. So I just wanted to put in that as a reminder of the value of these snag forests. And I think I'm going to just end my presentation there. Thank you so much. A lot of these findings are really new. For example, the marten denning in a intensely burned patch. That was in July, and I haven't actually heard if anyone has heard about martins denning in a intensely burned patch. Please let me know. But I know I knew I would find it sooner or later, and I'm delighted that I did find it. I was completely lucky that I trained the camera for 7 months on a really beautiful big snag close to water, so high chances there. And sure enough, it was a space valued by the martin, probably still valued by it, and hope it stays. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maya. A wonderful presentation, and that footage that you get is just amazing and very touching. So we're going to pivot over to the question and answer time. Again, please post your questions in the Q&A section for Zoom, and I'll be sharing those with the presenters. And to start off, I actually want to ask Dick a question related to his chapter in Nature's Phoenix, in the new second edition of Nature's Phoenix. I hear some people only talk about blackback woodpeckers in the context of intensely burned forests, but I was really struck by your chapter, how it describes a flow over time of benefits to different types of birds that benefit from the effects of intense fire at different time frames after the fire. Could you talk a little bit more about those other beneficiaries in terms of time after blackback woodpeckers? And you're muted right now.
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. I can think of a couple of examples. So the blackback woodpecker comes in right away. It can be there within a year of a fire, but after year 4, 5, 6, the population certainly decline. By year 10, 11, it's hard to see them anymore. So it's a short-lived thing. For morel mushroom, it's 1 year. That's it, and that's all you get. But if you just wait, a half dozen years, 6 to 10 years, you see things like house wrens go through the roof. There was a publication by a fellow out of Oregon that showed that house wrens are hurt by fire, but they were studying the fire 1 year after and 2 years after. If they had waited 4, 5, 6 years, they would have seen precisely the opposite result. The same thing would go for something like a Lewis's woodpecker, an amazing bird. They're not abundant in the year or two after fire, but just wait 10 years. What happens is after year 6 or 7, this is when all the snags begin to break because of windstorms and things like that. So you have lots of big broken top snags. Lewis's woodpecker needs very large trees that are very weak. They're a weak excavator. But give it 10 years and holy cow, here's this special bird that is just phenomenally abundant. The same goes for white-breasted nuthatch. What's going on there? Well, the trees, the snags begin to age, the bark begins peeling off away from the trunk, and that leaves more, larger areas to get into. So the larger nuthatch begins to have a heyday. So yeah, different things happen at different stages of succession. It's not surprising that there are things that like 20-year-old burns and things that like 100-year-old post-fire and things that like old growth. And so from a manager's standpoint, you have to be thinking about the landscape and about how do we maintain every stage of succession across the landscape. And for something like a morel mushroom, it means always having 1-year-old burn. For something like a blackback, it means always having, 1 to 4 or 5, 6-year-old, 10-year-old burns. And so do we see in a map of the forests every single stage of succession undisturbed, not modified through logging and that kind of thing? That's what we need to be shooting for in our management, would be my argument.
Great, thank you. There was a question posted that got into the theme of the amount of high severity fire or the size of the patches of high severity fire, because patches of high severity fire within mixed severity fires can come in different sizes, including quite large ones. And So I was wondering if you all could address both for birds and mammals. Does wildlife use large high severity patches or just the small ones?
Does anyone? I have some.
Absolutely uses high severity, large patches. Absolutely. So I'm sorry, Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Monica.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, they're absolutely documented using large patches, small patches. And I think, Dick, you mentioned before in our earlier talks is that it's just more of this great habitat. If you've seen these presentations that we've made and you see the diversity of the species that use these areas, and it's not just in conifer forests, but it's all around the world, that these animals evolved with this high severity fire, and you have large patches are what really make the ecological changes that we see so many species need.
Yeah, I agree. It's for some of these species like blackback, I mean, the size of their territory, Vicky Saab and others have shown is, I don't know, 400 hectares or something, minimum. You need huge patches just for one territory. And if we're talking 10 birds, it's thousands of acres. And thousands of acres of severely burned patches are not unusual at all. And severe fires always leave mixed severity results.
Yes.
Low severity understory burns do not give mixed severity results. Only high severity fire can do that. And it will always go on the fire severity map webpage, download any of the thousands of fires, and every single one will show you about a third low, a third medium, and a third high severity. Now, you're just not going to see 100% high severity, as some people would like you to believe. So, the very first paper I published in 1995, we looked at the size of the patches, and there was no relationship between area of the high severity and the probability of occurrence. So big or small, the high severity patches are great. And people that argue, oh my gosh, the trees can't colonize more than 100 meters away from the edge of a forest. Well, have you ever looked at a Clark's nutcracker and how far they go and disperse seeds? Look, there's regeneration everywhere within these patches. Sure, not as much in the middle of a huge severe patch, but it's not unnatural at all to have variation in nature.
Perfect. I agree.
Wonderful. Another question asks, the Forest Service often characterizes logging and thinning as mimicking fire. Can you please speak to some of the differences between natural fire and the falsehood of logging as a fire proxy?
Well, I think the answer is in the trees, that logging removes those trees. And natural fire, they burns them, leaves them standing. They provide amazing habitat, all sorts of resources over time. Some of them will fall. And over a very long time, you begin to have them fall. Some of these big burn trees remain standing for decades, become important nesting sites for basal hollows for bats. So it is apples and oranges. Logging does not at all mimic fire. And in fact, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that. Basically looking at bird communities in logged forest versus burned forest, and there's different communities of birds in the burned forest. It is apples and oranges, that it does not mimic fire.
I wanted to add to what Monica's saying a little bit, because there's a couple of studies I've noticed talking about pileated woodpeckers and Fisher taking over pileated woodpecker nesting cavities and creating a den out of it. Now, pileated woodpeckers are going to use a cavity that's typically 20 to 30 feet off the ground, pretty high, and female fishers need that because actually the male fishers can come after them. So it needs to be big enough for a female to get in and out while she's denning with her kits, but not for the male to get in. The male shouldn't be in. So it's just this sort of this incredible combination. And Rebecca Green is one of the folks who documented a pileated woodpecker male coming up to his old nesting cavity, and a female fisher coming out of it with teeth bared, trying to defend her space. But the same is true when you look at some burned forests. And nobody's really talked about this with burned forests, but it's pretty well studied in forests in general. But if you look at burned forests that are inhabited by pileated woodpeckers, that's the same profile. They're creating those beautiful potential future fisher den sites. And of course, now I only just found a marten, and it's hard enough. It's hard to find den sites, but I can only extrapolate from on the basis of the data that exists, that these den sites are going to be dime a dozen, because the pileated will leave its old cavity for another cavity and create a new one, or come back. But the fisher can use those old cavities, and she needs more than one, which is another reason why we need, not, as Dakota was saying earlier, if this 5 to 6 snags per acre is abysmally low, and logging takes out most of the snags. Well, we got the quota of snags there. The problem is fisher needs to transport her young from one cavity to the next, not once, but possibly twice during one denning season. So, and it's a very high risk time. So if she doesn't have enough backup of different snags and different fallen logs, and it's always going to have to be far away from the male, that's it. There's no hope for the young, because the first den is in a place that's small for the young, for young to be small, and then she has to look for a bigger one and then a bigger one. So it's just really, really important housing.
Another thought is Jerry Franklin and others have advocated cutting in ways that mimic nature, putting patches into the woods and that sort of thing. And I think from a landscape standpoint, you can, I'd say the word mimic nature, but if you then go in and get data in those converted forest patches, there's not anything like what you see when it burns, which is what Monica was getting at. And either of us could turn you on to the publications that demonstrate they're not anything alike. So a clear cut's not anything like a burned patch. A thin forest is not anything like an unthinned forest in terms of the post-fire response.
I'd also like to just one quick point as well, additional, is that I think it's a really interesting but not talked about effect very much, that when you are logging, you do not know the genetic makeup of the trees that you're logging. And those very trees that you're targeting to cut might be the trees that are genetically more resilient to, for example, future droughts. They found that trees that survive droughts are genetically different from those that did not survive droughts. So I just think we need to think carefully about when we log. Again, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how this works. Maybe some of these trees would survive the fire. But when you cut them, you have no idea what kind of genetic diversity and whether you're tampering basically with the evolutionary trajectory of the trees in the forest. So it's another thought when we just kind of think, well, yeah, as Dick said, the forest is not just structure. There's so much more to it. These are living creatures. The trees are alive. The bushes are alive. They're genetically diverse. So I like for us to think a little bit about that too when we think about cutting trees down.
Thank you. So a related question that's come up is around prescribed fire. And I'll ask it this way: does prescribed fire work as a substitute for mixed severity wildfire in terms of benefits for birds and mammals?
And I'll start with mixed conifer forests. Prescribed fires tend to be lower severity understory burns, which are not at all the natural kind of fire that occurred in mixed conifer forests. Perhaps in the dry, open-grown, pure ponderosa pine forests of the Southwest, okay, maybe. But where it's being applied, where I live in the Northern Rockies, is absurd. It's not at all natural in an ecological sense. Yeah.
If it's done at the right time of year when natural fires might burn, and if the prescribed fire has high severity fire effects, then I think there could be some benefits. But overall, it's not always the same as wildfire.
Yeah, that time of year
severe
thing,
wildfire.
that time of year thing you mentioned is really interesting. Both plants and animals have evolved to the ones that most depend on fire and have evolved to depend on fire, depend also on the time of year that fire occurs. When those plants burn, and their reproductive success depends on when those fires burn. And we tend to do prescribed fire at ecologically inappropriate times of year, on the edges, on the shoulders of the true fire season. And so from an ecological standpoint, prescribed fire is not at all natural. And it's not as widespread as we're led to believe in terms of Native American burning. Now, that was a very localized sort of thing for utilitarian purposes, for driving game and baskets and all the rest, which is great. We do a lot of things for utilitarian purposes, including cutting trees. But if we do it in a small scale, an ecologically responsible fashion, that's one thing. But the targets that I'm reading, the Forest Service targets of how many millions of acres we want to treat, no, that's ecologically inappropriate.
And I'll just add, I was looking at one of the sentences I underlined in Monica's chapter in the Nature's Phoenix book on page 121. It notes, prescribed fire does not provide the expected gains in biological diversity for a range of mammal, reptile, bird, and plant taxa. So moving on, there was a request in terms of using this information to communicate with the public and when writing letters to representatives. There was a question asking about having talking points available for the public to use. What are the best, easy, accessible talking point type resources that you can recommend to the public for engaging on matters related to severe fire and wildlife?
I have a web page, geez, I'll have to get the name of the silly thing. Anyway, a fire webpage, if you go to my homepage, and it's got sort of bullets there. I can provide that link for you if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, if you're able to post that in the chat, that would be great. Other recommendations for resources?
I just want to say, Monica, I don't know if you still have that on your website, but you had a short film about the black-backed woodpecker. Beautiful, beautiful film. Thanks. And it's very well narrated and literally chock full of talking points.
Yes, that's an excellent film.
Thank you. Forest Born of Fire on Wild Nature Institute's website, but you can find it on YouTube as well. I don't know in terms of resources for getting those talking points, but one of the things that I always love about doing these kinds of presentations is what a positive message it is. And when I talk about this with people, I think it makes them feel okay, because we know there's lots of fire going out there. The world is kind of heating up. Big fires burn every year. I live, in Mariposa, California, and that's it's been burned several times. So we know fire is always a big issue. But I think we talk about it as we don't have to fear it so much when it's happening out in, outside of our immediate town areas. It's actually a great thing. Like, ooh, a fire, great. And like Dick said, let's make a safari industry out of it. People go to Africa on safari all the time and spend tons of money. Let's have people go up to our burned forests and have guides take them and show them and see everything. And it's such a wonderful, positive message that we need that now in this day and age. We need positive environmental messages. And I think taking people up to see the beauty of these severely burned forests with all the life in it is a nice talking point, nice message for people.
Right. I've always argued that I think Missoula might be the first community to have a parade down the street the next time a fire burns near town. I don't know if we reached that many yet, but we're getting there. I found that webpage. It's fire-ecology.com. Just type that in your URL and you'll get the webpage, and it's got mini videos and from old PBS film series, and I think Monica's thing is linked, the film there. So.
Great. And I would also add beyond. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maya, please.
I just wanted to ask about Dick's the disturbance film that you featured in, which is absolutely brilliant. Is that also in that web page with all the other PBS links?
Yes, it's on. I think it's on that my web page. I think at the bottom of that fire ecology thing, there's a link to my personal webpage, and I have all those videos, various videos, and that one's there. Disturbance is a really good one by Jeremy Roberts. Yeah.
And in terms
And
of
the fire lab in Missoula that Dick you mentioned in your talk is, I think, also has some good resources about how to protect your home. And I mean, that should be part of our talking point as well, is sort of recognizing that people are concerned about their homes and what we can do to truly solve that issue.
Right.
So the fire lab has good stuff too.
Yeah. If we're safe and we feel safe, then we can begin to celebrate.
Yes.
There was one question asking on that point, asking about when Dick, during your presentation, you mentioned the Cohen research on fire safety and the video of big fires next to a house and how it's kept safe. Someone asked how to access that video. Do you know?
That's on the fireecology.com webpage. I've got it linked there.
Okay, perfect. And then just before we leave the original topic, in terms of places for talking points and resources, I just wanted to flag the Wild Nature Institute website beyond the video that Monica referenced. I think it's a great place in terms of compiling a lot of that, the research and the communications work on the ecological importance of intense fires and the variety of wildlife that benefit from it. And in terms of bullet points and fact sheets, I think the John Muir Project may also have some fact sheets available on this point. I don't know, Jen, if that's something you can share in the link, or otherwise people can go to the John Muir Project website for those resources.
And of course, Nature's Phoenix book is also a great resource for deriving talking points.
Absolutely. The cornerstone of this whole webinar series is that the second edition of Nature's Phoenix is an incredible resource, and I really strongly encourage everyone who can go out and get a copy. It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, well done, Dominick and Chad, for co-editing that. Very well done.
Mm-hmm.
So another question asks, you often hear about invasive species following fire and the negative connotations it carries. Can you address the impact of this aspect?
Yeah, I included that in my talk because I know that in some areas, particularly chaparral and coastal sage scrub, there's been invasive grasses that have spread in because of a little bit too much fire caused by like human starts, especially down in Southern California. So it can actually kind of convert the habitat into these non-native grasses. So that can be a concern.
Yeah, the chaparral's the worst for sure.
Yeah. So
just to flip that for 1 second, there's a very big danger of invasive species spreading with, I'm not sure about prescribed fire, but certainly with pre-fire thinning activities and post-fire logging activities.
True.
You know, it can come in on the wheels. It can probably come in with people in use. I'm not sure, but we're seeing that more and more in these pre-fire thin forests.
And in the post-fire interventions. Yeah. Okay.
We have to watch out for that. Mm-hmm.
Another question says, I'm always struck by the difference in the message between independent researchers and the Forest Service. Any speculation as to why?
Yeah, it's a good one.
That's a good question.
I like to say the story we're telling is really, honestly, one of nature's best kept secrets. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is this such a secret? What we're all talking about here. You don't go on the street, ask somebody, they've never heard this story. And I think there's several reasons I tried to outline in the little book I'm writing. But the main one is that I think the messaging that comes out of the Forest Service and other organizations is something that supports a fire industrial complex, basically, where they want to keep the status quo. And any message that lies out, outside of those things that severe fire is bad, is going to be squished. The other thing that's difficult is from a scientist's perspective. Scientists don't do their research in a way that exposes some of the magic. So, for example, they don't have good replication. They have one study plot. It's a different kind of fire. It was not the high severity. I mean, it takes a lot of work to get the right kind of fire to see the real results. Often, the other thing that frustrates me tremendously is that the response variable scientists use is 9 times out of 10 species diversity. I'm going to look at fire effects and look at diversity. Well, diversity hides more than it reveals. You have to look at individual species because what's going on underneath the hood is what's important. And so it's complicated. Only a few people really are exposing what's amazing. And you have to look carefully at why that is. And then think carefully about why the messaging that Smokey Bear has is so dominant out there.
Yeah, and I kind of have to say, I think with scientists, a lot of times people who do scientific research are not sometimes very trained in communication of results. And so you have like a lot of the studies I found were really amazing, exposing the magic, seeing this stuff, but you never heard of this study. It's just published in a scientific journal and that's that. So it's like we need to sort of amplify this research and have, a chorus of voices of scientists that have been finding this stuff over and over again as well. So we really, that's, it's part of this is what Nature's Phoenix is, pulling together scientists to be able to make the case for the ecological importance of severe fire. But I think a lot of times scientists don't do communication to the public. So there's like these scientific journals and then the public doesn't see it. So maybe that's on us too, to get the message out more.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of papers on science and science communication. It became a huge deal like 10, 15 years ago about how we're so poor at communicating. And I've been in workshops, learning how to communicate science, but I've come around to thinking that's not the problem here.
Okay.
This story is not complicated. It's the simplest thing you could ever tell. So it's not a science communication thing. And I found that of all the avenues I've used, from radio, TV, publications, professional, popular newspapers, magazines, the only thing that seems to have worked for me is taking 4 supervisors and district rangers out into the field. And I can see in 10 minutes, their perception change 180 degrees. And so you've got to get people into the field. You've got to go with the decision makers into the field where all the magic is happening. And that seems to me to be the only thing that has worked.
Yeah, but what I mean is not that scientists they're sort of poor communicators, is that they're not doing what you're doing. You are a good communicator and you understand that you need to take people out. You do your bird show. You are all like, and when I read your papers, you are very clear, the message, the story of fire. And I just think that, like, scientists will publish and then not even do anything. They won't do a press release. They won't do anything to get the word out. It's just, I published that paper. So it's like, there needs to be more Dick Huttos out there, basically communicating their research at all, because I think they're not.
It's funny. No, I mean, you more than anyone mimic, we mimic each other. We're just so in sync. It's insane on the story, but no one has heard. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Despite, maybe we're good at this. I don't know, but nobody's heard it. And I'll bet you, who's tuning into this. So the problem is, how do you reach the decision makers? We need to have a way to invite them out get into the field and show firsthand what's going on, because they're not going to be reading the papers. It's not going to happen. They're not going to be looking at the magazine articles. They're not going to be tuning into the webinars.
Yeah. You got to put it in front of their face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that there is a visible flood of papers I don't know how to name them. That you can find your own name for it, but these papers are talking about how fire is bad.
Yeah.
And they're well published, and they're repeated. You know, there's a repeated theme there. Blackback woodpeckers
Mhm.
only using the
Mhm.
corners
Mhm.
of a high severity fire patch really close to live trees. Number one, spotted owls suffering after wildfire and their numbers dropping after
Yeah.
the wildfire. And if you look, you know, or regeneration of giant sequoias absolutely failing to happen after fire, goshawks being wiped out, you know, all sensitive species. The assumption being, and I've even seen this, fishers, yes, they'll pass through, but they will never use a high severity fire patch. So this theme is transcends a lot of the very visible papers. And so it's really about what Ricardo and Monica are saying, making ourselves visible with publications that are already there, ours and others, but also the idea that some of that information that's out there needs to be corralled, you know, sort of, or contained in a way, just say, well, what if there was logging there and nobody noticed while they were doing the study? Is that a possibility? Just getting people to think about the questions before just accepting, you know, what's rampant in the literature right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are two big schools in California and in the West, you know, Berkeley, Davis, where a lot of the information you're talking about comes out. And if you look at the work and you look at the publications, I used some of those figures of good fire, bad fire. They're in those publications by those prominent scientists. And they're all paid by industry. The money's coming from Cal Fire, it's coming from industry. And that can't help but influence you. I know this firsthand. I received money from Plum Creek and Potlatch and other organizations, and I felt a tinge of guilt, you know, saying something bad about the people that are funding me. I think that's a real problem, and you have to look at who the scientists are and where they're getting their money, because it influences what you say.
Yeah, just to add to that point and to some of the examples that Maya gave of those studies out there making those misleading claims, again, just want to highlight that the Nature's Phoenix book provides very specific analyses of those studies, of those claims, showing what they leave out, what they omit, how they often conflate or substitute the effects of logging and treat it as the effects of fire, things of that sort. I think that the book is a fantastic resource on that. And on that point, we are at time. So I'm going to wrap things up here. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the next webinar in this series is going to be Thursday, September 26th at noon Pacific time. The subject is going to be confounding the overgrown forest myth. And the speakers are going to be Bryant Baker, who's the director and principal GIS analyst of Wildland Mapping Institute, and Chad Hanson, the principal ecologist and director of the John Muir Project. They're going to be presenting work that builds on the content of chapter 11 from the Nature's Phoenix book. So if you haven't had a chance to read that chapter, highly recommend that. Get the book. And with that, I just want to thank our speakers. I thought this was a tremendously helpful and fascinating presentation. And thank you so much for your presentations and for all the important research and communications work that you're doing on this subject. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.